Nicki Hutley, welcome. So the federal government has made a point of pursuing real wages growth. How does this result reflect on that?
Well, it doesn't look too good for them, does it, Joe? Because clearly wages are not keeping up with inflation. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. Earlier last year, we were starting to see some real wages growth come back after a long period where they hadn't been keeping their head above water. Now we're back in that situation, but it's not because wages aren't growing fast enough. They're pretty reasonably, around 3.5%. That's not bad for long-term averages. It's because inflation hasn't got back to where it needs to be. We've seen that spike up more recently, and that's a problem for both the government and the RBA.
And so is it likely that real wages will continue to fall behind inflation over the coming 6 months at least?
Yeah, look, I think so. The labour market, the RBA tells us is quite tight. Unemployment is relatively low by historical standards, but we know that particularly in some sectors, wages growth is coming down, particularly if we look at those not on awards or enterprise bargaining agreements. Individual agreements only got a 3% increase over the last year. So they're even further behind than those on awards or bargaining agreements. That's not going to change anytime soon. Inflation's going to take a while, we've been told by the RBA, to get back towards that middle of the band. So we're looking probably at a tough 2026, unfortunately.
So would unions in the midst of bargaining right now be justified in pursuing 3-year deals of at least 3.5% over 3 years?
Look, I think we've got to be very careful. Obviously, everyone, needs to put food on the table and pay the mortgage or the rent. But at the same time, we can't get caught in some sort of wage price spiral where we keep getting wages go higher to try and track prices that then leads to higher wages, and we get in this vicious cycle. So it's a fine balance at the moment. The missing element, of course, is productivity. If we can see productivity gains, then that raises the ceiling on how far wages growth can grow. But of course, we're not doing very well on that front at the moment.
Yeah, so productivity is going to be key to turning this around over the coming years. How do you adequately address that? How do you turn that around?
Well, it's no simple solution, and it doesn't just rest with government either. They're half the story, but obviously businesses themselves, their practices need to change. We're seeing some of that, of course, with the adoption of, AI into broader systems that makes people more efficient at certain tasks, right across the economy. We're seeing it with having more effect in the US economy, particularly. But that's not, again, the answer to everything or every sector. AI won't help you get a better haircut, for example, and we are very much a services-based economy. So technology is part of it. We've got to see skills improve. We've got to see businesses investing more in both capital, in terms of the equipment, as well as in the workforce. Government supporting that through the education sector, making sure that our tax system is up to scratch, that our regulatory system is doing the best that it can. We've had a productivity roundtable, quite a while ago now. Let's see what comes out of that, perhaps through the May budget.
And what's your perspective on how much the government is spending and how it's spending it in light of the inflationary challenges?
Yeah, well, I think we've seen, the government start to pull back a little bit, but still, the biggest wage increases were in the public sector, very much state sector driven rather than federal. But we've seen a lot of those agreements. Some of it's catch up and delayed increases, but even so, there's been stronger pressures in that public sector. We do need to see, obviously, budgets, particularly at the state level, start to get a little bit more under control. We're seeing blowouts and all sorts of infrastructure projects. But at the same time, obviously, people don't want to see their basic supports, health, education, the NDIS. We've got more demands on defence. It's always very easy to say cut the budget. It's an awful lot harder to do.